Hallo Leute, ich bin Katja und ihr seht Deutsch für euch. Okay guys, we have arrived at our last episodes about general sectioning of a sentence, which means that today we're going to talk about the after section. Remember, if you haven't seen the first 4 episodes on syntax, be sure to watch them now because I won't explain some stuff that I will be basing this episode off of again. Okay, the after section. The easy way to summarize what goes in here is everything else. Everything that you couldn't find a place for in the between section. Okay, that's it. Bye. I wish. The first contradiction you might notice with that statement is that 2 weeks ago I told you that you could basically put an endless number of segments into the between section. And that is exactly why I will need to go more into detail with my explanation. So to elaborate on this, the after section is for stuff that you couldn't fit in the between section anymore, but you still need to put in your sentence to deliver the information that you want to get across. That mostly happens when we have too much information in one sentence. So you could just close the tab right now and be satisfied with the fact that you can just split your information up into many little main clauses and just deliver exactly the same thing you wanted without having to bother about the after section. You're completely right. Go ahead. But if you want to get into more complicated or more German-like sentences, you will have to stay. Sorry. So what do we normally do in English as well if we can't state everything we want to say with our sentence in a main clause? We add more main clauses or subordinate clauses. And that is the main function of the after section. So in actuality, all sneakily, what the after section actually is another construct of before, left verb, between, right verb, and optionally another after section if there is more information you need to add. It's sentenceception! Really? What? Nothing. Go ahead. I mean, it's not like that joke's totally lame and overused, so, you know, as you were. So, we could form a sentence like this. Die junge Frau trinkt Wasser, das niemand mehr trinken will, weil es alt ist. Which means the young woman is drinking water that nobody wants to drink anymore because it's old. There are 2 main things that we can observe about this sentence. Firstly, we can see the thing that I just mentioned. These 2 after sections, because they are 2, that's why I put them in 2 separate lines, they are split up into all of the other sections that we already know. You might want to pause the video here and just take a minute to sort all the word groups and segments that you can tell apart. Secondly, we have a slightly different structure in these after sections, and that is the structure of subordinate clauses. If you remember our second episode on syntax, which was the one about the predicate in subordinate clauses, then you will remember that in these the predicate always goes at the very end. And if there are 2 parts of the predicate, so a finite and an infinite one, then the infinite part of the predicate always goes right before the finite part. This is clearly visible in the first after section, trinken will. We don't have left verb and right verb position, but we have all parts of the verb all clustered at the end of the sentence. Now all of this may bring up the question, what exactly is a subordinate clause really? We have a few kinds of these, and you already know those in English. However, I feel like they do deserve some explaining, and that is why I want to give them their own episode, because even though you are probably familiar with the concept, it can't hurt to do some extra explaining on how the individual subordinate clauses, or let's say after sections, work. So we are going to go into detail on what those are in 2 weeks. And for now, we're just going to take a look at a few examples that I'm then going to get back to in 2 weeks. Maybe you'll even figure them out from that alone, and you will then be able to give yourself a break in 2 weeks. Who knows? So, first sentence. Die Frau geht in die Küche und trinkt ein Glas Wasser. I put the Sie in here and I put it in brackets because it is the same subject, so you don't need to repeat it, but just in case you were confused that we didn't have a subject in the sentence, it is implied. Let's say that. So our after section here is und sie trinkt ein Glas Wasser. Second example, die junge Frau trinkt Wasser, weil sie durstig ist. The young woman drinks water because she is thirsty. And then, die Frau, die Wasser trinkt, ist in der Küche. So wait, what happened here? Again, I will go into detail on this in 2 weeks, but just remember for now that if we're facing a relative clause, which which is what this is, so kind of a shoved-in sentence that adds meaning to a specific segment, then through that we can practically put the after section right behind that segment. But as I said, I will go into detail on that in 2 weeks. Another thing that the after section does is that it gives you the possibility, especially in spoken German, to add information that you forgot to add before closing up your sentence. The sentence won't sound nice anymore, but it will still be understandable. So we could have a conversation like this. Speaker A says, "Hast du gehört?" Did you hear? Die junge Frau trinkt Wasser in der Küche. Standard sentence, the young woman is drinking water in the kitchen. Speaker B says, "Na und?" So? Ich habe auch schon Wasser getrunken. I have had water before. In der Küche, in the kitchen. He kind of forgot to say that, he has had water in the kitchen before. For whatever reason that is important, we will just leave out of the picture. But this works better with some constructions than with others. For example, saying ich habe auch schon in der Küche getrunken Wasser doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That wouldn't work. So I am aware that this is tempting for English speakers, so I want you to know that this possibility exists if you ever hear it, from a native speaker that is, but I want you not to use it, because it's way too unsure and I don't think you can wrap your head around it fast enough to be, confident in its usage, in its correct usage, let's say that. It can be used to emphasize what stands in the after section, but your chance of just butchering your own sentence is very high. It's basically as if a German were to rely on the opposite working, and ending up with a sentence, I have water in the kitchen drunken before. That's kind of what it would sound like to us if you said, ich habe auch schon in der Küche getrunken Wasser. It just doesn't fit. So I won't even go into detail what works and what doesn't. Just don't do it unless you actually do forget to add a segment while you're speaking. So in writing, just don't do it. Consider it wrong. So to sum up, firstly, the after section is really another construct of all the other sections in disguise, so to say. Secondly, it often is filled with a subordinate clause, of which there are a few kinds that we will talk about in episode 45. Thirdly, it mostly comes into play when the information you want to deliver in one sentence is too much for one clause, which is why you then take part of your between section and turn it into a subordinate clause or an additional main clause, which we then call the after section. And fourthly, in some rare cases, you can take one segment from the between section and put it into the after section. This can be used for emphasis, but it is not recommended because you can do, you could end up making a lot of mistakes with it. So if you need to emphasize a segment, you should just put it into the before section if you can, because using the after section is risky, especially for beginners, and should really only be used if you forget something while speaking. Then it's not bad. People won't hit you for it or anything. And that's it for today. Your random word of the week is der Ordner. Just like in English, this is also used for digital folders, so the things that you have on your computer desktop. Bis nächste Woche. Tschüss!